NBC contamination causes casualties, restricts the use of equipment, terrain, and buildings, and degrades the ability of the division to continue the battle. Contamination hazards affecting operations are found in the form of solids, which settle as a fine dust, liquids, which descend from a mist or rain, and gases, which are delivered as a vapor cloud. Contamination can be dealt with by avoiding the area containing the hazard, by keeping personnel, equipment, and supplies under cover, by exposing equipment contaminated by chemicals to the weather, by limiting the spread of contamination, by decontamination, and lastly, by allowing sufficient time for fallout to decay to an acceptable lower level. Radiological contamination decays with time, and airborne fallout is moved by the wind. It is not affected by weather and other variables that influence a chemical hazard. Decontamination of exposed personnel should be done as quickly as possible to reduce the buildup of radiation. Chemical contamination also decays with time, but in accordance with the persistency of the agent. Special paints can be applied to equipment to reduce absorption and facilitate cleanup, and decontamination reduces the hazard or removes the agent. Decontamination is carried out by individuals when they first encounter a radiological or chemical hazard, and by units and formations when the commander decides a lessening of the hazard is required, and time and the situation permit. Decontamination sustains combat power by enabling units to return to their assigned tasks. It reduces casualties due to contact with chemical agents, radioactive fallout, heat, fatigue, and psychological stress. The optimum balance between resource conservation and the sustainment of combat power involves decontaminating personnel and equipment as soon as possible, prioritizing the processing of equipment, decontaminating only as necessary to continue with the mission, and carrying out decontamination as far forward as possible. Terrain decontamination around a critical bridge, ford site, road junction, or the like, may be necessary, but is a slow, highly resource-intensive process. Decontamination resources within the division include individual soldiers with decontamination mitts or kits, vehicle crews with onboard decontamination apparatus, combat teams or subunits with their portable sprayers, scrubbing equipment, buckets, garbage pails, mops, sponges, decontaminants, and an exchange set of NBC gear. Battle groups with power-driven decontamination units, bladders, pumps, decontaminants and detergents. And the supply battalion's decontamination platoons, each capable of operating 3 decontamination centers. Decontamination activities are classified as immediate, operational, and complete. Following an attack, the commander in location will order immediate decontamination to be carried out in situ by individuals using on-hand resources. It involves cleaning or removing contamination from exposed skin, masks, clothing, weapons, and gloves, and spraying and cleaning surfaces that must be touched in the performance of essential battlefield tasks. Operational decontamination involves a more detailed cleanup of personnel and equipment, with particular attention being paid to areas contacted by operators. This activity may be carried out in a hide or battle position, or at a nearby site, where it would be assisted by a unit decontamination team. A unit decontamination site should need little or no preparation. It can be located well forward, readily accessible to hides, battle or gun positions. If a subunit has to remain in place, a site could be established immediately adjacent to it. The site must be defendable, provide easy access for vehicles, have a degree of concealment, a nearby source of water, good drainage, and if possible, clean areas for vehicle washdown and gear exchange. It includes a waiting area, vehicle washdown area, personnel cleanup area, an assembly area, and a stores area. The unit NBC representative directs activity at the site. He is responsible for site reconnaissance, the layout of work areas, supervising the operational decontamination process, and coordinating the flow of personnel and vehicles. He works with a representative from the element undergoing decontamination. His team includes operators to handle the unit's powered decontamination apparatus, personnel to issue stores, decontaminants, and, if necessary, the required NBC gear. The subunit undergoing decontamination provides part of the work party and a security element. At a waiting area, vehicles and equipment are checked for contamination. Extra crew or section personnel are sent to the personnel area where they continue decontamination. One vehicle at a time is called forward to the wash site, where it is hosed down with hot, high-pressure water, which may be mixed with decontaminant. The vehicle is then checked and moved to the assembly area to await its crew. Activities in the personnel area normally involve a check for contamination, a cleanup of equipment, and, if possible, a change of NBC gear. It is unlikely that the contamination level will be reduced enough to allow removal of individual protective equipment. Therefore, an exchange will only be made if absolutely necessary. Once personnel decontamination has been completed, soldiers move to the assembly area and move out with their vehicles. As a general guide, a unit decontamination site can process 3 vehicles an hour. Complete decontamination is part of an extensive reconstitution effort which aims at neutralizing or reducing contamination to as low a level as practicable, so that no danger exists to unprotected personnel. Division Headquarters directs the establishment of 1 or more decontamination centers. These are planned as a result of known or suspected enemy intentions, or requested by a unit or formation which has been contaminated by chemical or nuclear attack. At Division Headquarters, the G3, through G3NBC, controls the decontamination center, allocates the appropriate technical resources, coordinates the movement of the contaminated forces to the center, and tasks the unit responsible for its establishment and operation. The G3NBC also makes recommendation on the setup of the center and coordinates any engineer support required to improve site access, dig sumps, and help clear work areas. The G4 staff organize the center's logistic requirements and provide needed resources. The area selected for a decontamination center will cover the better part of a grid square. An adequate water source must be nearby, as thousands of gallons are required for the decontamination operation. The center must be readily accessible to vehicles and be defensible. Wooded area and buildings should be used when possible to assist with concealment. Reconnaissance elements have checked the prominent terrain features and nearby routes for any radiological or chemical contamination and carried out a detailed inspection of the selected area. A unit-sized entity, out of contact with the enemy, sets up and assists in operating the center. It provides its control staff, radio communications, work parties, and any required medical, repair, and supply detachments. The technical equipment and operating personnel would be provided by one of the decontamination platoons from the Division Service Group Supply Battalion. The decontamination platoons can only carry a small portion of the stores needed to conduct sustained decontamination operations. Bulk supplies of clothing, IPE, and decontaminants have to be delivered to centers under division logistics arrangements. The unit to undergo decontamination deploys security elements around the center, provides guides and drivers, and makes available additional work groups as requested. Only at these centers can the required decontamination resources, along with supply, engineer, medical, police, and repair facilities, be gathered as part of an overall formation activity. A decontamination center contains a pre-decontamination staging area, an equipment decontamination station, a personnel decontamination station, and an assembly area. The decontamination center and its heavy volume of traffic makes it extremely vulnerable, and the planning process must anticipate an air, artillery, chemical, or ground attack. At a designated time, the contaminated combat team or subunit is taken out of battle, moves along an assigned route to a contact point, and into the pre-decontamination staging area. At the staging area, vehicles and personnel are checked for chemical and radiological contamination. Crews scrape off any heavy mud and debris from the vehicle undercarriage and remove any items that cannot be easily decontaminated, such as seat covers and canvas protectors. Food and water may be usable if protected or contained within packaging that can be decontaminated. Vehicles then move to the equipment decontamination station, which can handle about 42 vehicles per day, depending upon resources provided. At the same time, dismounted crews move to the personnel station, which can process approximately 1,500 troops per day. The equipment decontamination process involves 7 basic steps. The cycle begins with the vehicle being hosed down with hot soapy water to remove gross contamination, grease, and dirt. Next, it is driven through a slurry pit of decontamination solution to clean the undercarriage and running gear. At the third site, decontaminant is applied, and if necessary, the vehicle is scrubbed to remove any thickened or remaining agent, and then moves to a holding area where it sits for 20 to 30 minutes to allow the decontaminant to work. The vehicle is then moved to the rinse site, where it is rinsed with high-pressure hoses. For the sixth step, it is checked for any remaining contamination. At the last site, clean vehicles are greased and oiled and moved to the assembly area. The personnel decontamination process involves 10 basic steps. The cycle begins with soldiers working in pairs, submerging and rinsing web and weapons in buckets of decontaminant. Once pronounced clean, these items are taken to the reissue point. The pair then move to the shuffle pit and decontaminate their overboots. At the next stage, the NVC suit, gloves, and overboots are removed. Following this, combat clothing is removed and bagged, along with any personal items. Underclothing is taken off at the next site, and personnel move into the shower area, where the canister is detached from the mask. The mask is then removed and decontaminated while the soldiers complete their routine. On leaving the shower, they are checked for any residual contamination. The troops then enter the clothing exchange and dressing point, where each receives an issue of clean underwear, clothing, IPE, and a replacement canister. Anyone requiring medical treatment is directed to the medical detachment. Persons now move to the reissue point to retrieve any personal effects, webbing, and weapons, and proceed to the assembly area. In the assembly area, Troops regroup and marry up with their vehicles and equipment. Here, supply and repair detachments refit the combat team or subunit prior to its departure. Additionally, the combat potential of the combat team is assessed, and any required actions to restore its operational capability are taken. When the operation is completed, contaminated garments and materials are taken to a pit, bleach spread over them, the pit covered and marked. If clothing is in short supply, it will be bagged, marked, and taken to the laundry and decontamination facility, where it is cleaned and reissued. Water runoff from any decontamination operation is collected in sumps. Overflow is channeled away from the water source. All sites, sumps, and pits are considered contaminated. They are marked with the appropriate NBC warning sign, and the locations reported through the chain of command. Complete decontamination for helicopters is conducted at the maintenance squadron's base before major repairs or scheduled maintenance is undertaken. Procedurally, this would involve the aircraft landing at Station 1, shutting down and being checked for contamination. Contaminated aircraft are taken to the wash station, where special attention is paid to the fuselage belly, skids, doors, and fuel ports. The aircraft is moved to the third station, where the interior is decontaminated. At Station 4, the aircraft is checked for any residual contamination, rendered operational, and cleared for departure. Decontaminants are classified as standard, non-standard, or natural. The corrosive nature of chemical-based, readily available standard decontaminants requires special care when processing weapons, ammunition, electronic components, optical equipment, and helicopters. These include Fuller's earth to absorb contaminants, C1 solution for use on all exposed surfaces, supertropical bleach as a part of slurry mix on equipment and when burying contaminated gear, soaps and detergents for hot water washing of vehicles, weapons, and equipment, Savlon soap for cleaning masks, and a solution for removal of contamination from skin. Non-standard decontaminants of many types and uses can also be made available for special circumstances. Natural decontaminants are readily available in nature and include large amounts of water for flushing away all types of contamination, absorbents such as earth, sawdust, ashes, rags, etc. to remove gross contamination, and weathering, which means simply leaving equipment exposed to the elements. Contamination slows down the work process in all areas. It especially complicates medical functions, where teams must check and decontaminate arriving patients before proceeding with medical assistance, and where technicians involved in recovery and repair of equipment must work in NBC gear. Division workshop locations require a segregated area where contaminated vehicles and equipment are inspected, and where minor repairs are undertaken, along with a site where equipment is decontaminated prior to being repaired in clean shops. Division decontamination operations concentrate on the individual, section, platoon, combat team, or subunit, and aim to keep them operational. Decontamination is very resource-intensive and is conducted without the aid of specialized chemical units in the area of operations, with on-hand assets of the formation. The degree of decontamination ordered will constantly conflict with the maintenance of combat power in the forward area.